Pre-dawn at Stalag Luft 4, Pomerania, 6th of February 1945. Frost feathers the wire while floodlights cough to life, yellow cones rolling across faces the colour of tallow. Technical Sergeant Jack Sparky Ellison cinches twine around an 11-pound Red Cross parcel, feeling the biscuit tin knock the chocolate bar as if telling time. Across the gate, Oberschütze Otto Weiss, 52, Landesschütze Father Taylor, shifts a Panzerfaust 60 from hand to hand like a log he cannot keep warm. His carabiner, 98K, rides high on his shoulder. The sling leather creaks. Beyond him, a dog barks with the hopelessness of animals who understand weather. The column forms by barracks, fours across, caps pulled low over ears that ache as if punched. Sparky tastes last night's barley coffee in his teeth, ash bitter, warmed by a match struck on the nail head of a bunk. Otto counts heads, breath fogging his spectacles. A Luftwaffe clerk arrives with a satchel of papers that look heavier than any ration sack. He stamps and initials as if ink could conjure bread or coal. No train, no wagons. Feet and will. Sparky slides a single cigarette through the wire. Otto hesitates, then takes it with a nod you'd give a man at a funeral. Danke, he murmurs, and it is not the enemy's word but a human one, thin and embarrassed. In exchange, he pushes back a scrap of cord. Nothing, really. Yet more than nothing, because it is a private treaty that both might pretend to deny. The wind smells like cold iron. A Red Army rumour moves the way rumours do, changing jackets as it goes. Tanks at Köslin, guns on the road, rails cut behind, orders crackle. The guards step off, hobnails drumming a metronome the stomach cannot ignore. Men shoulder parcels that feel suddenly like contraband, American abundance wrapped in waxed paper, powdered milk, canned meat, biscuits, chocolate, tea, cigarettes, alien luxuries inside a German prison. Somewhere a Feldgendarme's gorget flashes like a coin you cannot spend. Somewhere a man coughs hard enough to see stars. They pass the gate. It shrieks, metal complaining at work colder than it was designed to do. The MG-42 crew rides at the rear on a cart, barrel sleeve wrapped in burlap, ammo chest clamped shut with the jealousy of poverty. Sparky glances back at the towers he has learned as constellations and feels the peculiar lightness of movement after months of static hunger. Otto touches his mess tin. It rings against his belt like a handbell, thin and priestly. If there is a moment when the story turns, it is small enough to miss. A guard's eyes lingering on a prisoner's coffee tin, the quick scuff of boots that were once better shoes, the way men look at heat. The road west opens like a narrow door, and cold air rushes through as if history itself inhaled. 6th of February, 1945. Inside Barrack 7, the air is wool and smoke. A stovepipe coughs sparks that don't warm anyone, and the one cigarette making the rounds glows like a railroad signal, green to go, then darkness again. Sparky rubs a notch into a biscuit with his thumb and snaps it into eighths. Currency. The economy works because everyone understands the exchange rate. 1 cigarette for hot water, 3 for a ladle of barley coffee, 10 for a spoon of powdered milk that turns brown bitterness into something like memory. He would later write that you could hear hunger in the way men handled paper. Parcels arrive irregularly. Crinkled cardboard is stroked the way you'd pet a tired dog. The contents are an inventory that smells of home and of system. Powdered milk, egg powder, tinned meat, biscuits, chocolate, tea, coffee, sugar, cigarettes, matches. In another barrack, a Luftwaffe supply clerk, cap askew, admits what the stamped forms conceal. Coal delivery missed, bread ration cut again, soap gone. Tomorrow, he says, but he does not meet eyes. The camp has math of its own. Calorie needs for a man standing 8 hours in sub-zero wind run high. For marching, they climb toward 3,000 a day. The issue soup, a shy broth chased around a bowl by potatoes that have forgotten what a potato is, might deliver half. Men improvise stoves from tins, punching air holes with nails scavenged from pallet wood, feeding the flame with twisted newspapers. A medic, sergeant's stripes frayed, notes feet whitening to the colour of chalk, the first sign of cold turning flesh into furniture. Otto peeks through the doorway. His boots are damper than they look. His breath streams in ropes. He tries to keep his eyes off the parcels and fails. Sparky surprises himself by offering grounds scraped from the bottom of a tin. The guard produces something so humble it hurts, a bar of soap cut to a child's thumb, grey and scentless, and puts it on the bunk like contraband. The exchange would have gotten both men in trouble if anyone had wanted to notice. Not everyone barters, some hoard, others give, usually once. The camp's rumour mill whirs under the rafters. Red Army tanks at Köslin, Americans in the Ardennes setting the horizon on fire with artillery, a shipment of parcels diverted to feed a Wehrmacht depot and never seen again. None of it changes the immediate problem. Heat, calories, time. Sparky pockets the soap, wraps a biscuit shard in paper for a man who will not ask, and listens to the wind trying the door like a curious animal. Outside, the tower light sweeps, then blinks out, and for a long breath it seems the night has decided in their favour. But the whistle that follows is iron, long and falling, and everyone understands what it means. Not rest, but movement. Not relief, but a march measured in miles and in cigarettes. A desk stands outdoors in the snow like a bad joke that no one finds funny. A Feldwebel thumps stamps into papers that the wind keeps trying to steal. Orders read cleanly in ink. Evacuation west, column by blocks. Any escape attempt will be met with fire. Reality is written in water and cold. Otto tightens a bootlace with string, then pats the burlap wrapped around his ankles. The Carabiner 98K over his shoulder is honest steel and walnut. The soles of his feet are deceit. The escort detachment is a cross-section of a crumbling state. Landesschützen mostly. Older men, men with healed wounds that never healed right, supplemented by a boy with a jaw set the way a boy sets it when he is trying to look like a poster. An MG-42 crew rides on a cart with their treasure. Barrel, tools, a chest of linked 7.92 by 57 cartridges that opens and closes like a miser's purse. The gun's cyclic rate, everyone knows, is a marvel. Something like 1,200 rounds a minute, but marvels eat. A Feldgendarmerie patrol passes, gorgets flashing like half-moons, boots thundering in a rhythm that says courtroom and sentence all at once. Behind them, the memory of a different rhythm, the long thunder from the Ardennes that the prisoners keep telling each other about, American artillery firing until the snow itself seemed to shake apart. More than 1 million shells in a matter of weeks, they say, closer to 1.25 million, and German gun teams rationed to tens of rounds per day, counting charges like prayers. It sounds impossible until you picture railheads that never sleep. The Luftwaffe clerk fusses with the manifest for parcels that have not yet arrived. He initials, he dates, he draws lines where lines are supposed to go. No one tells him the ink is freezing on the nib. Sparky watches him and understands, with the clarity of a radio man who has traced static back to its source, that the problem is not will or training. The problem is a line that begins at a factory and ends at a boot. America's line is steel on rails and rubber on roads. Germany's line is paper in wind. They step off. The MG crew keeps their chest clamped like a heartbeat, saving belts for the day the road turns ugly. Otto checks his pockets and counts 2 cigarettes and 15 cartridges, then stops counting because numbers can be weapons and can also be wounds. The gate swings wide and complains in the cold. The column tilts west as if gravity lay that way, and the day begins to spend them. The lane beyond the wire runs between hedges rimed white, each twig carrying its own small winter. Liesel Schaefer stands at her gate with a heel of black bread wrapped in a kerchief, steam from the house curling past her ear like a question she cannot answer. The column comes on in fours, breath lifting in banners, mess tins knocking like bells. Sparky feels the biscuits and chocolate move in his parcel with each step, small collisions that sound indecent in a land of hunger. At the gate, Otto slows the line with a gesture that is regulation anywhere men carry rifles and worry about their backs. The stop is officially for water discipline and spacing. Unofficially, everyone knows what it is for. Liesl keeps her eyes on the ground, as if politeness could blind her. Sparky steps close enough to see that the bread is sawdust grey and honest. He palms a cigarette from his pocket and holds it out. She nods without thanking, then offers the bread to Otto first. He pretends not to want it and fails with a small, ruined smile. They make hot water from snow using the tools of poor alchemists, a tin can with nail holes punched for breath, a strip of newspaper twisted into a wick, a match struck on a boot heel. Sparky shakes grounds from a tin like a priest salting a field. Otto closes his eyes at the smell. Men who fought through years taste something like time reversing. The brew is not coffee as they remember it, but it is heat, and heat enters the blood with the gravity of a promise. Liesl watches a boy in uniform, Volkssturm, too young, carrying a Panzerfaust too large, and understands that the signboards on the roads are older than he is. The weapon looks like a child's toy to her until she notices the way the warhead's lacquer catches light. She has learned to read lacquer. She has learned to tell the difference between a truck and a wagon by the way the cold sounds from their wheels. None of that knowledge changes the taste of the bread. They move again. The road turns past a tree whose bark looks like burned bread. Rumour travels faster than boots. Soviet tanks at Köslin. American fighters seen clean and silver between clouds. Rails cut behind them. Parcels uncertain ahead. Sparky feels, not for the first time, that he is walking inside a table of organisation, a moving address book of a dying army. Otto taps the butt of his rifle with his knuckle as if to knock luck awake. The lane narrows and the hedges knit behind them like a seam closed by cold hands. The scent of smoke follows like a thin dog. Ahead, the column crests a low rise and the wind sharpens. A man coughs until he kneels. Otto calls the step as if sound alone could keep men upright, and for a short while it does. The tree appears first as a darker thread in the cloth of hedges, then as a limb drawing a slow arc against pewter sky. The wind has polished the bark until it looks wet. From the limb hangs a body in field grey, boots rubbed nearly smooth by a road that will not see him again. The placard swings from his chest on wire that bites the neck. Deserteur. A feldgendarme stands nearby, gorget catching a spill of light, face unreadable as a wall. The column hesitates because human beings do, even when orders say not to. Otto lifts his hand to push them forward, but the gesture is not the hard thing it pretends to be. He is careful not to look at the man's hands, which hang in a way that tells the hour. Sparky does look. He wants to take some measure from the sight and cannot. Later he will tell himself he did it to remember. In the moment he watches because there is nowhere else to put his eyes. They move on. In the barn that night, the MG-42 crew rehearses as practice, not threat, because the chest of belts is light, and they do not know when they will see more. The assistant gunner sets the tripod, the gunner lays the barrel, the feed tray clacks shut with authority, and nothing happens, because nothing should. The weapon, a miracle of stamped steel, is a promise the state cannot keep. It will fire, but not often, and never enough. What happens on the rope is not unique. The prisoners whisper numbers, thousands executed for leaving posts, for undermining morale, for words said the wrong way to the wrong officer in the wrong week. The math of discipline thickens the air. Liesl, who has come to the barn door with a chipped mug of hot water she will not admit is pity, stares at the gun and thinks of flour. Unrelated, except that everything is related when wood smoke smells like hunger. Sparky sits with his back against a hayrick and writes in a hand that shakes only when he stops writing. He notes the cold, the smell of oil in the gun, the bar of the placard's letters, the way the guard with spectacles blinked at steam as if surprised to find it on, Earth. He does not write fear. He writes ammunition unknown. Otto stands the first watch rather than trade with a boy whose knees knock. When he draws the bolt, he does it softly, as if the sound could wake the dead. In the dark, someone whispers a hymn and someone else curses, and the wind takes both and sorts them without caring. Outside the barn, the tree waits where all roads meet, and the placard swings on its small metal axis like a clock you cannot wind back. A scrap of newspaper rides inside Sparky's boot as extra lining, the ink printing ghost words on his sock. At midday, he pulls it free to dry and smooths it across his knee. The headline is older than the road, but the names jump: Ardennen, Bastogne, St. Vith. A Brit beside him, older and careful, taps the page and says in a voice like a file, "They threw more than 1 million shells in a few weeks." He means Americans, and he means that the sky itself once felt heavy. Another voice adds the larger figure, about 1,250,000, and the number settles like snow. The numbers change temperature in his head. He thinks of the MG 42 tripod's stamped legs and the way the feed tray closes as if swallowing, then of belts counted like coins and saved like candles. He thinks of a truck he saw once at low altitude, the 1.5 with canvas sides, and of a rumour told last night. The United States bought 2.4 million trucks during the war, while Germany scraped by at a fraction of that, closer to 350,000. It is the kind of arithmetic that decides routes before officers do. He does not need to believe anything. He needs only to look. A wagon creaks by, horses ribbed and steaming. Beyond it, the road shows the gouge marks of tyres that bite and go rather than spin and pray. Liesel watches from a lane and counts the visible truths. Men with rifles, yes. Men without gloves, yes. A guard who takes a cigarette as if it were a medal, yes. The kettle on her stove makes a sound like a fighter warming guns. Coffee would have been a sin once. Now it is sacrament and logistics. Otto sits on a stump and turns a single cartridge in his fingers. The bullet nose shines dully where a thumb has polished it without meaning to. He remembers a training talk about a machine gun section in attack, enfilade, beaten zones, the geometry of dominance. All true, all elegant, all dependent on belts that do not arrive. He would have sneered at a story about prisoners pitying guards. Now he watches steam rise from a tin cup and feels the pity-like weather. Sparky writes figures on the newspaper's blank margin because numbers hold still when men cannot. US aircraft, 1944, roughly 96,000. German aircraft, around 40,000. Ardennes shells, about 1,250,000. German guns rationed to handfuls per day. He circles the trucks again, because trucks are the grammar that turns nouns into action. The match he strikes is American and flares as if the factory that made it still hums. When they step off, the scrap of newspaper returns to his boot and the ink prints the arithmetic into his skin. If a nation can send chocolate into captivity, it can send anything anywhere. Gasoline by the river, shells by the million, mercy by the truckload. The road is the same width for everyone. The difference is who owns it. The ditch glittered under a skim of ice, and even the crows were quiet. A halt had been called not from mercy, but because one guard's knee gave out with a crack. Sparky and the medic, everyone called Doc, eased him to the lee of a hedgerow. Otto stood watch, jaw set, then folded down beside them because there is only one wind and it bites everyone. A tin can stove breathed thanks in small blue tongues while snow hissed into a cup. Doc's kit was what a man can carry. Bandage rolls, aspirin tablets hoarded like diamonds, a needle threaded for blisters. He worked boots the way a farrier works a hoof, gentle, efficient, silent. The feet beneath were white as chalk, then mottled purple where the cold had begun its quiet theft. Sparky cut a biscuit into thirds, added a spoon of powdered milk to barley coffee, and watched the colour shift from funeral to breakfast by a shade. Otto pretended to check his sling and inhaled like a man reading a letter from home. Calorie math ran crueler than orders. Marching men burned 3,000 a day. The escort's ration, when it arrived, could be half that. The Panzerfaust on Otto's shoulder, the one thing on him that could crack a Sherman, had become a talisman without a ritual. No tanks on this road, no ambush worth the warmth it would cost to wait. The carabiner's bolt slid true. The stomach beneath the greatcoat did not. They moved again, because movement is the only heat you do not have to barter for. The column strung itself along the lane like beads on wire, each footstep choosing the same shallow rut as the one before. Liesel walked beside her father's wagon, handing out tin mugs of hot water that smelled faintly of rye. A boy in a Volkssturm armband fumbled his cigarette. Sparky stooped, picked it from the ice, dried it on his sleeve, and returned it with a nod that cost nothing and meant everything. Doc trimmed a boot to save a toe and wrapped it in cloth cut from a shirt. He told Otto to keep the pace human or carry a corpse, and Otto grunted assent. A dog shadowed the column for a mile, and then vanished the way dogs do when they decide they are their own nation again. Overhead, a strip of sky opened for a pair of silver fighters, then closed. At a crossroads, a signboard had been chopped to kindling except for one arrow, Mooseberg, chalked in a stranger's hand. The rumour ran again: Americans in Bavaria, trucks by the thousand, armour like a moving town, and men straightened. Otto counted his cartridges and stopped. Men adjusted straps and swallowed against the ache in their throats. Frost squeaked under boots. Otto nodded once, a small treaty between hunger and duty. Sparky cinched the parcel tighter, and the stove went out behind them with a domestic sigh as the column stepped back into the wind. By noon the sky had scabbed over with cloud, muffling sound until hoof-clop and hobnail were a single tired metronome. A farm wagon lurched past an Opel Blitz, nosed into a snowbank like an animal scenting for water. The truck's fuel cap sat open. The tank, Otto said without saying, had been dry long before the wheels stopped turning. Two horses leaned in their collars, ribs showing through winter coat. The detour came at a creek where the plank bridge had been torn out by men who believed water could stop history. It could not, but it could slow it. POWs and guards together took the cart tongues and pulled like a work gang, boots slipping, curses braided with prayers. Liesel's father clicked to his team, and the horses shouldered as if they had decided they were tractors. On the far bank, a woman held up a tin for cigarettes the way a collection plate catches coins. Sparky's eye made inventories without asking. Horses here, yes, trucks there. A deuce and a half glimpsed once in a week like a rumour with fenders. He had flown over motor pools that looked like cities, canvas roofs in rows, exhaust heat lifting in mirage. On this road, the exhaust was the breath of animals. When the breeze shifted, he caught it, hot oil, gasoline, the democratic smell of solutions, from a convoy moving somewhere, beyond the ridge. You could tell a nation by the way it solved distance. Rail was the Reich's backbone. Air and artillery had turned vertebrae to gravel. The math had become muscle. Germany dragged supplies on hooves, on shoulders, on the dignity of men who had earned better. America rolled supplies on rubber. Even the match Sparky struck under the tin tasted like certainty when the flame took without coaxing. They crested a rise and saw a road running east like a sentence. On its far horizon, barely more than motion, a file of CCKWS moved nose to tail, canvas taut, a procession as holy to this village as a pageant. The column watched with the same expression men wear at baptisms and funerals. Otto's gaze snagged on the squared-off jerry cans and did not let go. He said nothing. He did not need to. Toward evening, the cold turned from knife to hammer. They bivouacked in a shed with gaps you could read a newspaper through, not that anyone had the light. Doc boiled water and counted aspirin. Liesel divided a heel of bread into 4 algebraic pieces and invented fairness. Somewhere in the night the horses stamped and a truck, far, far away, downshifted on a grade and held its gear. The sound ran along the rafters and left a promise behind. Orders shifted like ice on a river. New route, longer legs, fewer halts. The reason came sideways. In a corporal's grunt, in a village radio crackling, the Americans had swung into Bavaria. Denial now meant distance. The column would stretch, thin, and keep moving until maps blurred. Deaths accumulated at the margins, quiet as frost. A burial detail carried a blanket like a question, and Doc said the answers he could. Otto allowed Sparky's friend to ride a wagon when the man's boots bled through, masking pity as practicality. A prisoner down slowed everyone, and everyone was closer to the end than to any principle. The gesture travelled the line like heat through a pipe. Liesel, seeing it, remembered when the postman had once given her a stamp for no reason at all, and how the shape of a country can live in the smallest rules we teach our children. The distances grew obscene. Men spoke of hundreds of miles totalled in loops and backtracks. 500, 600, depending on who counted and where their strength gave out. The parcel rumour went bad. Rails broken, deliveries uncertain, guards watching prisoner tins with a hunger that made them forget to be cruel. Sparky felt something shift in the word enemy. It did not mean friend. It meant neighbour in a burning building. He would learn later a statistic that felt like a fairy tale told by a factory whistle. At Willow Run, the line had built B-24s at a peak cadence of about 1 an hour, 24 bombers a day, wings and engines and radios in a dance of torque and scheduling, while German plants bled under the hammer and could not dream of that kind of tempo by the war's last winter. The scale would have been incomprehensible to the boy with the Panzerfaust and the hole in his glove. The truth reached him anyway, in the form of empty shelves and cold barracks. Toward evening, a storm came on. Not much snow, but the kind of wind that drives sound out of your head. The column moved by habit. Otto walked like a man in a photograph, face composed, feet arguing. Sparky counted steps in 8s, the way a radio operator counts seconds in code groups, and found that rhythm could shove pain to the margins for a while. Somewhere a church bell marked the hour, and it sounded closer than it was. At a crossroads, the signboard was chalked again. Moosburg. The word had become not a town but a verb, a direction men did, a promise their legs could sign. The road ran downhill and the talk picked up. Someone said Americans were careful with their artillery when prisoners were close. Someone else said you could tell an American motor pool by the smell of coffee as well as gasoline. They did not know if either thing was true. They walked as if both were. The morning of 29th April 1945 broke with a low ceiling and a rattle of distant engines. Combat Command A of the 14th Armoured Division slid into its approach like a craftsman into a familiar jig. Tanks forward, half-tracks in trace, CCKWS stacked on the road with chalked codes that turned chaos into service. Lieutenant Hank Bowers rode shotgun in a deuce and a half, clipboard jammed under his arm, pencil tucked behind his ear. He counted fuel cans by habit, the way another man might say a prayer. Fire discipline mattered more than fireworks. Intelligence said the wire penned a small city, tens of thousands of POWs. So artillery that could have erased the problem at a kilometre was held like a boxer's offhand. The attack moved on throttle, not on blast. When the gates at Stalag 7A yawned, they did it as gates sometimes do under pressure from both sides at once. German sentries falling back into the open, prisoners surging toward geometry they had memorized from dreams. The wire did not so much vanish as become irrelevant. Hank saw what happens when plans collide with people. Water first. He had engineers lay points by the truckload, drums and gravity taps, because thirst kills faster than hunger, and order is what keeps thirst from turning into riot. Food next, K-rations, D-bars, sacks of the army's answer to famine, a language of calories spoken through cardboard. Medical next, triage lines set by medics who moved like chess players, one move ahead of collapse. A city had arrived in a minute. Now it had to be fed. Sparky's palm struck the fender of an American truck and came away oily and at home. The engine's idle felt like a cat against the bone. Otto let his rifle down by inches, as if it contained hot glass, then lifted both hands and warmed them in the truck's exhaust. His breath rose to meet the vapour like two white flags. Doc found a water buffalo on a tow bar and laughed once, abrupt and private, because logistics had the decency to be ugly. Somewhere behind them, the guns did their work anyway, hammering intersections to discourage ideas. But at the camp, it was receipts, manifests, and hose couplings. Hank had learned numbers that start with tonnage and end with lives. A camp this size needed hundreds of tons a day if you wanted not only survival but dignity. Latrines dug with enough distance, trash burned, vermin chased. Trucks are verbs. He put them into the sentence. By night, the engines idled in rows, and the smell that hung under the canvas was coffee, gasoline, wet wool, and the iron sweetness of relief. The wire still stood in places, but the men on both sides had agreed it was over. Hank took the first mug handed to him and drank it black, the way arithmetic tastes when it finally adds up to mercy. Time stepped sideways, as it does at war's end. 2 days after Moosburg, on May 1st, 1945 at Stalag Luftaförns on the Baltic, the fog lifted like theatre cloth to show guard towers without guards. The planked walkways were empty, the doors swung inward, and gulls took the perches as if auditioning. The POWs looked at one another, and then at the wire, and then at the sky, which refused to offer guidance. A captain with a voice made for parade said the obvious: "We hold, we organise, we do not run." Men nodded, because order feeds you even before the soup does. They raised a flag they had sewn from nothing, bedsheet white, blanket red, shirt blue, stitched with the care you give to a thing you intend to believe. When it climbed the staff, it made a sound like a sail catching a pocket of wind. An improvised band hammered rhythm from mess tins, and the rhythm did what artillery sometimes does, clarified intention. The Soviets would arrive soon, for now the camp belonged to the idea that fed it. Some guards had left notes. One read, in a schoolteacher's hand, "No fuel, no bread, no orders that can be obeyed." Another had left a loaf on a stoop, as if to apologise to whoever found it. A Luftwaffe adjutant's log, pages damp and curling, tabulated men as if they were packages. The last line was a tired ditto mark and a pencil smear. The arithmetic of a state that had carried its sums too far had resolved itself to zero. Sparky. There because. Stories brayed across miles after the fact would have understood the wirescape as a diagram, towers as nodes, patrol paths as edges, supply as everything that connects them. When connection fails, systems fall silent. At Bath, silence was not emptiness, but opportunity. Men sorted latrines and kitchens first because order creates calories. Someone found a Red Cross storehouse that had eluded requisition and brought out tins as if drawing miracles from a well. When the Soviet troops came, they brought their own system, their own history, their own hunger. The handshake at the wire was brief and correct, as doctrine prescribes when doctrine hasn't met reality. Translation made polite work of contradictions. The Americans remained wary and courteous, and the Russians, having hauled a continent on their backs, took measure without ceremony. There would be negotiations and rumours, threats and favours, the grey that follows victory like a loyal dog. By sunset, the flag snapped like a heartbeat in the onshore wind. Men who had measured time by roll call found themselves thinking in meals and in yards walked without being counted. Somewhere south, a column of CCKWs rolled toward another unnamed task. The sea kept folding itself onto the sand as if practicing. Freedom is not an event but a schedule, and that night it kept very good time. Under a canvas fly at Moosburg, Hank Bowers opened 3 ledgers with the tired pleasure of a man who likes problems that yield fuel, rations, bodies. The day ran in gallons, tons and names. Trucks reversed and told their own jokes in beeps and hisses. Engineers argued about hose diameters. Medics made order out of pain. When the coffee urn burped, a cheer rose reflexively, the way a platoon answers roll. He totaled the survival math without romance. Western Allied POW mortality in German hands hovered in the low single digits, roughly 3 to 4%. The Soviets had died by the unspeakable majority, more than half by sober counts. The numbers were not an indulgence, but an indictment, proof of priorities that chose punishment over bread, spectacle over sanitation. The ledger fetched it all to one pencil line: feed men or bury them. Sparky watched a row of deuce-and-a-halfs nose to tail and felt again the hum he'd heard in the air war, a system thinking. America had bought some 2.4 million military trucks in the war years and built roughly 560,000 of this very pattern. Germany's total had stalled at a fraction, nearer 350,000. You could spell doctrine with that difference. You could spell mercy. In the Ardennes, the US had laid down about 1,250,000 artillery rounds in weeks. Here the guns stayed holstered because precision, maps, radios, trucks, could do the job instead. He wrote the other number because it reads like fiction and happens to be true. At Willow Run, they once pushed a B-24 Liberator off the line about every hour at peak. A bomber an hour is not a boast. It is a sentence that drafts a continent into its grammar. From that cadence flows coffee in prison camps and fuel at crossroads and bandages in barrels. The enemy had courage, skill, traditions older than some American towns. They did not have that sentence. Otto, already walking home through ruins in his head, stood by a truck's exhaust and warmed his hands the way he had at the tin can on the road. Liesel took from her apron a square of chocolate she had saved and divided it for her brother and herself with the care of a pharmacist. Doc closed his tin of aspirin and let the thumps and calls of a working motor pool lull him like surf. Sparky folded the empty parcel paper and slipped it into his pocket as if keeping a receipt for a promise kept. By lantern, Hank closed fuel and opened reconstruction. The same verbs that win wars: move, build, feed, make peace. Statistics do not love you back, but they will carry you if you hitch correctly. The engines idled, rows of steel animals breathing, and the night smelled like coffee and gasoline. On his last line he wrote one word as if it were a proof: enough.